In the summer of 1884, 4 British sailors were stranded in a small lifeboat in the South Atlantic. The sailors' ship had sunk, and they had managed to escape to the lifeboat with only 2 cans of canned radish and no drinking water. According to the newspaper, Thomas Dudley was captain, Edwin Stevens was first mate, and Edmund Brooke was crew, all of excellent character. The 4th member of the crew was 17-year-old Richard Parker, a mate. Parker was an orphan on his first long voyage. Against the advice of his friends, he had joined the crew with the ambition of youth, thinking that sea travel would make a man of him. The 4 stranded sailors watched the horizon from their lifeboat in the hope that a ship would pass and rescue them. For the first 3 days, they ate canned radishes. On the 4th day, they caught a sea turtle. For the next 8 days, they ate nothing. Parker lay in the corner of the lifeboat. He had ignored the advice of the others and had drunk seawater and had fallen ill. Parker looked like he was dying. On the 19th day, Captain Dudley suggested that they draw lots to decide who should die so that the others could survive. But First Mate Brooks refused, and no draw was made. The next day came, but there was no ship in sight. Captain Dudley told First Mate Brooks to look the other way and signaled to crewman Stevens to kill Parker. Dudley told the boy that his last moment had come and offered him last rites, and then they killed him. The 3 sailors fed on the boy's flesh for 4 days, and on the 24th day, help arrived. The 3 sailors were rescued. After being extradited to England, they were arrested and interrogated. Brooks confessed. Dudley and Stevens defended themselves in court. They confessed to killing and eating Parker out of necessity. Suppose you were the judge, what would you decide? Putting the law aside, let's consider only the moral dimension of the case. Is the killing of Parker morally permissible? The strongest justification for the moral defense of the sailors' decision is that, given the circumstances, killing Parker was necessary to save 3 lives. If one had not been killed, all 4 sailors would have died. Parker, who was ill and would soon die, was the best candidate. But this justification is open to several objections. First, how can we calculate whether the benefit or the harm would have outweighed killing Parker? The lives saved, the joy of the relatives of those saved, even if all this is taken into account, the consequences of killing Parker could be harmful to society. For example, it might weaken the law. Secondly, even if all this can be calculated, don't we have a social conscience beyond all this? Isn't it wrong to treat a human being in this way, even for the benefit of others? The 2 different approaches to this incident on the lifeboat illustrate 2 opposing traditions of justice. The first approach bases the morality of the action on the consequences of the action, i.e. the right thing to do is the one that will produce the best results. According to the second approach, it is not only the consequences that matter. As a society, we have some moral duties and rights. Is morality a mathematical or cost-benefit calculation of our lives? Jeremy Bentham tried to answer these questions about 250 years ago. Jeremy Bentham, an English moral philosopher and legal reformer, is the founder of the doctrine of utilitarianism. His basic idea is simply this: the supreme principle of morality is the maximization of happiness and the maximization of total pleasure over pain. According to Bentham, the right thing to do is the thing that maximizes utility. By utilitarianism, Bentham means that which produces pleasure and happiness and prevents suffering. Bentham explains his philosophy as follows: we are all governed by the feelings of pleasure and pain. These emotions are our absolute masters. They govern us in everything we do, and in deciding what we ought to do. The standard of right and wrong depends on their throne. We all seek pleasure and avoid pain. Utilitarian philosophy affirms this fact and makes it the basis of moral and political life. It makes a bold claim for Bentham's principle of utility maximization. There are no possible reasons to reject this principle. Bentham argues that every moral claim must be based on the idea of maximizing happiness. People may say that they believe in certain moral duties. For example, we should not run a red light. But if they believe that these moral duties will not bring happiness in the long run, they will immediately abandon them. Bentham presents one of the most brilliant methods of utilitarian logic. In this proposal, he sets up a self-financing poorhouse for the poor. The main aim is to reduce the number of beggars on the street. Because he observes that beggars reduce the happiness of people passing by in two ways. The sight of a beggar on the street causes sympathy pain for compassionate people and disgust for people without compassion. So beggars, he says, do not benefit social happiness. Some might say that this is unfair to beggars, but Bentham's point is that social happiness trumps the happiness of beggars. But Bentham's utilitarianism is open to some objections. The most common objection to utilitarianism is that it fails to respect individual rights. Individuals can be trampled on by thinking only of the total happiness of society. Utilitarianism offers a moral system based on measuring, summing up, and calculating happiness. This moral science evaluates preferences without question. Everyone's preferences are considered equal. But in order to aggregate preferences, these preferences must be measurable on a single scale. But is it possible to translate all moral values into a single value without any loss of meaning? This is another objection to utilitarianism. With all this utilitarian logic and the objections to it in mind, I would like to end the video with a story and ask you a question. The story tells the story of a city called Omelas. It is a city of happiness and civilization, where there are no kings, no slaves, no advertising, no stock market, no atomic bombs. Under one of the beautiful houses of Omelas, there is a room in the basement. This windowless room has a locked door. In this room lives a mentally handicapped, neglected, and poorly cared for child. He spends his days in unhappiness. All the people who live in Omelas know that he lives there. They all know that he has to be there. They all know that their happiness, the beauty of the city, even the abundance of their crops, the health of their children, all depend on the life of this miserable boy in that warehouse. If the boy were taken out of that warehouse and given a better life, all the wealth, beauty, and splendor of omelas would be destroyed that day and that hour. These were the circumstances. Since Bentham's philosophy is about maximizing total happiness, he argues that in this case, the child should continue to stay there, and that this is normal. In Bentham's utilitarianism, it is all about numbers. If the happiness of 3 people requires the unhappiness of 1 person, then it is acceptable for 1 person to be unhappy. The reason why I mention Bentham's philosophy is that there is no uniform understanding of utilitarianism. After Bentham, John Stuart Mill would emerge and re-systematize the utilitarianism school in a way that would save it from these objections. Back to the story, these objections to Bentham's utilitarianism, based on human rights, argue that these conditions are morally unacceptable, even if they lead to the happiness of a city. I said I would ask you a question before the end of the video. My question is, are all these conditions morally acceptable? Would you accept this environment in the life of a child?